Hey guys, welcome back to another Vlogmas. The Christmas countdown is on and I've got a million things to do, but today I want to finish sending out the last batch of my holiday cards and I thought I'd give it a whirl and try to make them from scratch. I've never made holiday cards before, but I'm going to attempt to be crafty and try to make it turn out decent. So if you are behind on your mailing list, pull up a chair, break out your supplies, and let's try to make some holiday cards today. And don't worry about being perfect, because if they don't turn out good, you can always go to the store. I searched for DIY holiday card designs and came across a 5-minute crafts video. The video had 34 ideas that looked pretty doable, so I picked 5 of my favorites to make today. I'll link the video down below in case you want to check out the rest of the ideas. The first card that I made was a pop-up Christmas tree. I picked out the background paper first because I wanted to use a pattern behind the tree. I ended up choosing one that had gold thread winding around white paper, and then I glued it onto brown cardstock. Next, I folded green paper like an accordion and cut it into different sized strips. I thought it'd be cute if I drew some colored light bulbs hanging off the thread since the tree wasn't going to have any ornaments. The real difficult part was sticking it onto the card. I tried Scotch adhesive dot roller, Gorilla Glue, and even Joe's Sticky Stuff, which is a gummy adhesive tape, but none of it worked. It was probably because the background paper was too porous or something, but in the end, the thing that worked was a glue gun. I added a brown stump also in an accordion style, and then I overlapped 3 yellow stars to make it pop up from the paper. This card is a little different than the original, but I think it turned out nice. If I were to remake this card again, I'd only use a glue gun for the tree because the accordion really pulls on the paper when it's being stretched open, so the glue gun would make the adhesion more secure. I'd also draw the light bulbs a little bigger and space them out more so that the background doesn't look too busy. Drawing and coloring in the bulbs also took a lot of time. I'd want to add less of them so that I'd have more time to make copies of this card. The second card that I made was a pop-up pile of presents. Try saying that 3 times fast. Using white cardstock, I folded it in half and cut 4 slits onto the folded side. I also had to guess the measurements on this one, and folding the presents in was a little tricky. But once they popped out, I was able to wrap them in actual wrapping paper. You can use patterned paper for this part, but I didn't have any that looked Christmassy or wintry, so I went with wrapping paper instead. If you use wrapping paper, make sure the pieces are cut precisely to fit onto the cardstock, because wrapping paper can be flimsy and easy to rip. If you accidentally fold a crease into it, it's harder to fix than if you were to use paper. I cut up some washi tape and stuck them onto the presents to make it look like a ribbon is tied around them. I then used some actual ribbon to tie a bow and glued it to the top of the present. I was about to trim the ends of the ribbon since they were too long, but I thought it'd be cute to twist them and glue the tips to the card to fill up some of the empty white space. Next, I had to add a straight line below the presents. You can use washi tape for this part, but I didn't have any colors that really fit, so I taped another ribbon along the bottom of the card so it looks like the presents are sitting on a floor. To fill in more of the white space, I added little golden bows by using a stamp and Versamark ink. This ink goes on clear, but it's sticky, so I can color it in by applying Stampin' Up! Pastels. The pastels are like colored chalk, and when I apply it with a spongy applicator, it will only stick to the ink. It's sort of like when you put glue on paper and sprinkle glitter onto it. The original video used snowflake stickers, so you can really fill up the background with whatever you want. This card turned out cute, but I made the presents too small. The amount of empty space made it look almost unfinished. I'll probably add some hand lettering to the top of this one, but if I were to make this card again, I'd definitely make the presents bigger in order for them to look more balanced with the rest of the card. The third card that I made had 3D ornaments. I picked out 2 colored papers that had glitter on it and 2 colored papers that had a metallic sheen to make these ornaments sparkle. I cut 4 circles out of each paper for a total of 12 circles. You can use a cup or anything round to trace a circle onto the paper and then cut them out with scissors, but I happen to have supplies by Creative Memories from my old scrapbooking days. Their cutting blades are really unique because they have these 2 prongs that sit in a groove on these plastic templates so that the blade can slide along the track and create smooth cuts. Next, I glued the circles onto each other so that each side has a design. I folded the circles in half and glued 3 of those together. I decided to mount them onto white cardstock, which I folded in half and then trimmed down once I knew how large the ornaments were. I used a red ribbon to make the bows and twisted the ends in the same way that I did in the pop-up pile of presents card. The only difference here was that I added ribbon from the bow and extended it to the folded edge of the card so that it looked like the ornaments were suspended from the top. In the bottom left corner, the original video had Merry Xmas written in a very simple font. I decided to write out Merry Christmas instead, and also to write it in a hand-lettered style, because the ornaments look too fancy for it to be written so plainly. I have brush pens, but I haven't really learned hand lettering yet, so I sketched it out in pencil first and then colored it in. So this was the easiest card of the 3 to make so far. If you watched my last video, then you know how much I dislike working with glitter, and today was no exception. It fell everywhere into every crevice and I had to double vacuum to get it all out. But it was totally worth it because the card ended up looking rather elegant. And I think part of the reason was due to the paper choices that I made. You can definitely make them look more casual depending on the patterns that you choose, and then adjust the writing style according to that. I think the most time-consuming part though was the hand lettering. So that's something that I plan to work on in the new year so that I can execute it in one stroke like a pro. The 4th card that I made had a 3D Christmas tree. The tree was made using rectangular strips of paper in different sizes. In my case, I decided to make 7 layers, but you can make the tree as short or as tall as your cardstock size will allow. To be honest, when I first saw this card in the original video, it looked like it would be the easiest one of the 5 to make. But the biggest challenge for me was figuring out the paper measurements for the tree, since the original video didn't show any. I failed several times, but then learned that it was easier to use squares as the starting point for the rectangle. By folding a square in half, it becomes the perfect size rectangle to fold into a triangle. If you've ever folded a paper football, or if you're good at origami or geometry, you probably had this figured out before I did. I had made a first draft of the tree using folded squares, which you'll see here in different colored paper. These pieces are what I used as a size reference when cutting out rectangles from the green paper. I didn't want to cut out squares because the tree would have been too thick from the extra paper. Once I had folded all of the rectangles into triangles, I then glued them onto the cardstock, beginning from the smallest piece on top and worked my way down to the largest piece at the bottom. After I added a yellow star on top, it looked kind of plain, so I added an accordion brown stump that was left over from my first card. The original video used this beautiful glittery paper that made the tree look fancy, so I'm a bit underwhelmed with how mine turned out. I actually preferred my first draft of the tree with all of the different colored layers, so I might remake this card again using different color combinations. One idea that I took out of this was that you can use the same technique to make a stand-up tabletop tree. Think of it like an upside-down pile of solo cups. I would recommend using a thicker paper like cardstock, cutting out squares instead of rectangles, and gluing the triangle pieces together to give it more stability. The 5th and final card that I made was a cutout Christmas tree. Like the previous card, the most challenging part of this design was figuring out the measurements. In this case, it was for the size of the cutout triangles. I sketched out several templates that didn't use the right angles or spacing, but I finally ended up with one that worked. You'll see the template here on the yellow piece of paper. I glued a sheet of light green and white cardstock together. Then I folded it in half, keeping the white sheet on the outside. I unfolded the card and taped it down to my cutting mat so that it won't move around when I cut it. Using an X-Acto knife, I cut 2 sides of each triangle, leaving the bottom side alone so that I could fold paper out. I only used an X-Acto knife a few times before this, so it took me a while to figure out how much pressure I should apply and at what angle I should cut at. I was also cutting through 3 layers of cardstock, so that might have been why it was so hard for me to do. I highly recommend wearing goggles though, because the very tip of my blade actually broke off, and it's something that could have easily flown into my eye, so please be careful if you're using an X-Acto knife. So this card wasn't bad, but my triangles were smaller than the ones in the original video. So if I were to remake this card, I'd cut them bigger. I'd also draw the template directly onto the card so that I'd have one less layer to cut through. Because I had a difficult time cutting, my edges weren't very straight, so some of these edges were frayed. It's a nice design if you're going for a modern geometric kind of look, but it was probably the least fun to make out of these 5 cards. If I had to pick a favorite, I'd say it would be a tie between the first and third cards. The pop-up Christmas tree card looked the most impressive of the bunch, but it was the 3D Ornaments card that turned out elegant and was also the most straightforward one to make. Not a bad first attempt for an amateur crafter, don't you think? I'm sure the second time around will be better than the first, but even with experience, I really don't think I'd be able to finish any of these cards in just 5 minutes. No need to run to the store. These holiday cards turned out way better than I was expecting. But they weren't easy to make. 5-minute craft videos look simple and easy, but a lot of it was done off camera, like prep work and paper measurements. Perhaps a more experienced crafter could figure it out more easily than a beginner like me. Comment down below which of my cards was your favorite. If you tried these designs too, let me know how they turned out. And please share any card making tips because I can't be the only one struggling to make these cards too. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching and see you next time.